Check, check. Check, check, check. Okay. This is stupid. Check, 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 check. Check. There we go. All right. Warning, the current stream's bit rate is lower than recommended. Okay. How do I fix that? Oh, well. We'll just get into it. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm gonna open up my parking lot and start answering some questions. I get a lot of questions in workshops, and I'm hashtag ADDAF, so I'll say put it in the parking lot, and then neither I nor any participant remembers. And let's just take a look, shall we? Mirrorborn. All right. Okay. So, let's see what we got back here. A lot of these I've answered already, and you can go check the link. Let's see. How does the introduction of a product manager shift the roles of product owners and scrum masters? What agile framework incorporates product managers? So, product manager is just a discipline. They could be on a scrum team or an agile team, but probably they're not. Usually they're sort of outwardly customer facing a lot more than the team. But I don't think it doesn't change much, right? All I would say is if you're a Scrum Team's product owner has a very narrowly focused job. The product owner is responsible for ordering a list that we call a product backlog that the end users, stakeholders, and team are going to work from to make sure that the right conversations happen in the right order. A product backlog just shows the product owner's current and new future priorities. A product manager does a whole bunch of other different stuff. Now, what would their interaction be? Well, a good product owner is going to want to have a tight relationship with the product manager of their product because while their name is product owner, they don't literally own the product. They own a list. And so the product manager is probably the one who can more appropriately be said to own the product. So we want to have tight involvement with them as product owner, and we want them involved in the conversations that we have with end users. And of course, we want real time face to face communication with end users. And so product managers often have access to those people, and we definitely want them involved. Now, is there any specific agile framework that incorporates product managers? Not that I know of, but I'm only familiar with a few. As far as I can see it, though, a product manager might be a member of an agile team, and they would just bring that discipline to the team. Like Scrum teams are fully cross functional. Now, I've found it to be rare that there's a product manager actually on the team, but they could be a key important contributor or SME or whatever you want to call it. So I would say that's sort of how that goes. Let's see. Book suggestions. Uh Book suggestions. I don't really have a lot of book suggestions because I don't think there's a lot of good books about Scrum and agility. Mostly, I have found that the people who write books don't spend a lot of time actually doing the stuff. So I'm a little biased. I would say the only books I recommend in my workshops, there's a book. If you're a product owner, there's some things that are not really particularly related to agility that are useful that I give to product owners. One is a book called Crossing the Chasm with Jeffrey Moore, and maybe that I'll put that out on social, so if you can find those links at some point. The other one is, and this one I have product owners of Scrum teams give to senior leadership, and it's called Radical Management by Stephen Denning, and it talks a lot about the difference between output, which is what we normally measure to measure progress, versus outcome, which is what Scrum is concerned with, right? Scrum isn't about doing a certain amount and kind of work in these periods, these short cycles we call sprints. It's about delivering value and identifying what value is the highest value and making sure that that's what's happening and getting into our sprint review. But books, I don't. There's not a lot of good books on Scrum and agility specifically. There's some fairly harmful ones, and this is probably makes me controversial and puts me at odds with very well known people out in the community. But I think books like User Stories Applied, garbage. Agile Estimating and Planning, garbage. Um, Scrum doing twice the work in half the time, garbage. These are books with a whole lot of nothing packed in them, and you got like discarded ideas from the '90s, things like story points, velocity, and pretending that as AI wants, so that is a user story, which it's not. User stories are from extreme programming. User stories are a story that a user writes about themselves. It's usually two or three sentences, and then the XP developers work on in an iteration making that happen. And but there's the end users on the team, right? So there's a very tight feedback loop and constantly on the same time um, talking to each other. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's see. Why can't a person be the scrum master for two teams at the same time? Many job descriptions include this tale. Yes, many job descriptions do because they don't fucking know what a scrum master does, right? Scrum master, their important job is not keeping track of events, or sometimes we call them meetings, right? And just being some kind of and managing the quote sprint backlog that's, you know, hidden away somewhere in an information refrigerator like Jira, which for the record, Jira is an acronym for geez, it's really awful. I feel, that's not fair. It's a good ticket tracker, but it just isn't really agile. All right. So why? So what does the Scrum Master do? Well, they need to make sure that everybody understands Scrum, and most people don't. It's not very well understood. There is an 11-page document. I mean, once you take out the cover pages and stuff on the internet at scrumguides.org, it shows, the framework. It's very lightweight. There's not much to it. You got to add stuff, and a lot of people don't like the Scrum Guide because of this, but it's intentionally non-prescriptive, right? So the Scrum Master has to make sure that people understand this empiricism idea, which is, that a sprint is not about doing a certain amount and kind of work. It's not work focused and plan driven. It's about trying to deliver value that we can get in front of real users to try out and tell us what they think about it. Scrum is for problems we can't solve on paper up front. And the problem that we're trying to solve is that we know we're going to make the wrong thing because we did for decades. We'd have these big, long efforts, and there's this utterly awful and terrible phase at the end that we call UAT. They say it's user acceptance. It's not. It's normally user rejection. And it's too late to change anything or do anything because we've run out of time and budget. And it's like, sorry, this is what you get. And when it's been studied, which it has by organizations like the Standish Group in something called the KS Report that they started in what, 94, and last time I saw one was like 2014. I think they gave up after that. I'm not sure. But 3 out of 4, software projects fail. So the problem that Scrum's trying to solve is we know we're going to make the wrong thing. How can we find out quicker? I mean, it sounds pessimistic, but that's the reality of it. We know we're going to make the wrong thing. Let's do that 2 weeks at a time so that we can find out immediately whether we made the right thing or not. Now, XP teams did this for a long, long, long time before Scrum even, became widely known, by having an end user on the team. We can't always do that though, because end users have day jobs and whatnot. But there's no excuse for not interacting with end users if we're honest now, because we have, instantaneous global information exchange on social media and the internet and everything else. So the Scrum Master's got to make sure that everybody understands this empiricism thing, which people don't. Scrum Master's going to make understand what things like a daily Scrum are for. Like, I've talked about this a bunch in the last week, especially, that it's not a sad panda status report. Yesterday I blah, blah, blah. Today I blah, blah, blah. I have no impediments. It's are we going to have a real usable thing that adds value at sprint review, period. So they have to make them understand that. They usually have to coach up a product owner who doesn't know how to do that job. And then they have to protect the team from the rest of the organization as the team's trying to, change the flow of their work and the way that they're doing things. That's, Scrum is an engine for learning and for becoming agile. My friend of mine, Dr. Dan Rossthorn, also a CST, once said that Scrum is training wheels for agility. I agree with that. So, the Scrum Master is going to spend an awful lot of time protecting the team. And if the Scrum Master is not, available 24/7 for a single team and isn't constantly, being mindful and aware of what's going on with them and protecting them, the rest of the organization and anybody who's interested or inclined, I should say, to interfere will. The story I tell in my workshops is that I was working with a team, a couple of teams actually, in San Jose, and at the time, I didn't have the authority or the cred or the background or whatever to say no. I'm only working with one team. So I think there were 2 or 3 teams that I was working with. That's fairly common. It's unfortunate, but it's fairly common. And I had to bounce around a lot. And sure enough, people in the organization, particularly sales, they would follow around behind me because they knew when I wasn't going to be there to, be the scrum police and tell them to leave my team alone. And there was one salesperson in particular who was notorious because he had season tickets to the San Jose Sharks hockey team. And there were some people on one of my teams that, liked hockey. And he would sneak in when I wasn't around and say, "Hey, can you do this thing for me? I got a sales presentation. I need a new built version of the build. Can you put it on my machine and make sure it works? I'll give you tickets to the hockey game." So if you're not around to protect the team, you're not going to, and you're not going to be able to do your job. And facilitation is a full time gig just by itself, right? And a scrum master is a facilitator. The other thing I would say is, and people do not do this in a way that I think has a lot of value, is there's this whole retrospective feedback loop, right? So at the end of a sprint, we spend the last couple hours trying to figure out, all right, where did we fall down and how could we do better, right? That's what a retrospective is. And if a scrum master hasn't spent, half of their time in the previous sprint preparing for that, it's going to be relatively low value, not much change, right? It's going to, and you've seen this. It'll be like, "Hey, what went well, what didn't go well?" And then we'll list a bunch of stuff out, and they'll be like, "Okay, great." Moving on, when it really needs to be, what do we need to change and how we can change it, and let's plan to do that in the next sprint. And that's its own, I mean, that's almost its own job by itself. So all of that put together tells me, and based on my experience both coaching scrum masters and being a scrum master, is you can't do that for more than one team. Once they get really, really high performing and are able to self manage, you might could switch from a scrum master role to more of a just a facilitator role, and be mostly just doing retros for teams. But even then, I would still say that the teams that I've had that are very high performing, they have a dedicated scrum master. Which considerations does the dev team need to be aware of in PBIs regarding design? Um, I'm not really sure what this one means. I mean, design is a thing that happens every sprint, and a product backlog item is just like a request for value, right? Somebody has a problem they need solved, or they have a need they need satisfied, and the PBI just says that in a couple words, maybe a short sentence, and so there's not much to it. So the development team needs to one of the things I tell them is, your first task in your sprint backlog for a PBI ought to be a design swarm where you get, representatives of each discipline on your team together with the people you're actually making it for, and start sketching out a design and thinking about what the underlying technology behind it is and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, PBIs have or should have all of the parts of your life cycle hidden underneath them, right? So there's going to be design, build, test. But in an empirical approach like Scrum, design is emergent, right? So that's sort of what I think about that. If a Scrum project requires an architect at the start of the work to give the Scrum team direction and guidance, will that person be temporarily part of the developers? No. And big upfront architecture is something that is contrary to, I think, empiricism, which is the underlying idea behind Scrum, right? Architecture, and man, people struggle with this. I mean, I was a designer when I was still technical, and that's not the same thing exactly, but I understood architecture too, though. And in a traditional approach, that all happens up front. In an empirical approach like Scrum, it definitely does not, right? And you have to deal with something called incremental re-architecture. Alistair Coburn's talked about this at length, so you could sort of seek him out on the internet and social, and just Google incremental re-architecture. So people need to be on a Scrum team from beginning to end. And if there isn't somebody who can do architecture work on the Scrum team, they better figure it out. And I don't care how smart or how experienced a senior solutions architect is. They're not as smart and they don't have as much experience as 6 to 8 people working together collaboratively. It's just a fact. So I'm going to say the short answer to this question, and it's too late for that, is no. There is nobody who is a temporary part of the team. You either are or you are not. And if the team doesn't have all the skills, knowledge, and ability required to do all the work required, they are not cross functional. Then they better figure out how to do that. Let's see what else I got here. Most of these I've already answered. Looks like. Oh, I think I got one more. Oh, this is a good one. What are the great characteristics? What are the characteristics of a great SM? A few things. I think being very mindful, and I mean that in a more narrowly defined sense. I've been a secular Buddhist most of my adult life and studied Soto Zen, which is a specific tradition in the Zen tradition. And when we talk about mindfulness, it means being fully present and aware in the present moment. And I think Scrum Masters need that very much. I think you need to be, obviously you need to have excellent communication skills and be able to talk to different groups. That's one of the reasons I think sometimes neurodivergent people are so good at this is because you really do have to use quite a bit of masking as an SM because a different audience, you got to talk to a different way. If I could tell you right now, if I'm with a bunch of C levels, I don't talk the same way I do to a bunch of people um, on my team or other people. So you have to be a great communicator. You have to be pretty courageous because you usually start out putting a target on your back by telling people that what they're doing is not going to work or be useful, and here's what you need to do instead. And nobody likes what it actually is. And when you tear down what some hole coach came in 2 years ago and said about, oh, you got to use story points, you got to use stories, and says, yeah, no, we're not doing that. It doesn't work. You're gonna get a lot of heat from that. So you got to be pretty courageous. I would say very, very chill, even tempered, right? You can't get real stressed out about um, what people are doing and saying. And the other thing is you're a facilitator. And rule number one of facilitation is being detached from outcomes. So you're an SM, you lay out a path for people, but you cannot be emotionally or even personally invested in whether they follow that path or not. That's up to them. So I think mindfulness, detachment from outcomes, good communication. I mean, understanding the Scrum framework's important is important. Something just fell. Is important too, but the Scrum framework is that simple. I mean, it's not rocket surgery, y'all. It's defined in 11 pages at scrumguides.org, and it's been stripped down since 2010 when the first one came out, to the extent that it's super lightweight and a 10-year-old can understand it. I've actually had a 10-year-old pass the Scrum Alliance CSM test just to prove that that was true. So let's see. Anything else? No, not really. But go check out. I got a big parking lot. I put um, out on social, and I'll probably put it in the rebroadcast of this stream. I put this parking lot and all of the I call it long term parking because there's so many things that I get asked all the time, and those questions are all answered right here. So I also have a sort of a blog post I did a bunch of years ago about how to get Scrum experience without having any Scrum experience, which is challenging. All right, so that's about all I have to say about this. And is there anybody hanging out? Uh, if you want to put something in the chat to ask a question, I'm happy to deal with that. Otherwise, I think think I'm going to call it good. I finished. I cleared out my parking lot. I'm going to try to do this more often, but you can, give the link to people, and it'll rebroadcast, and anybody can watch it anytime they want. Uh, and maybe tell people about it. Maybe next time we can have a conversation. Peace.